Okay. Hello and welcome to Minor Compositions. For this week's conversation, we have one of our first repeat visitors. So thank you for coming along again, Ferdi.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me again.
Yeah, yeah, and this is a good excuse because we're getting together to sort of have a chat about your. How long can we say a book is new for? Is it new for like a year or for 6 months or for 2 years or?
I think a year maybe because yeah, I've been doing so many book talks also in person that it felt so long already, but actually yeah, I think still there's still not that many people that who knows it the book. So I think
Hmm.
it's still we can still consider it new.
Okay. Yeah, so we'll say we're having a chat about
Mm.
Ferdi's new and quite excellent book, Enduring Otherwise, Muslim, Queer, and Trans Worldmaking in Indonesia. And I will tell you up front that
Mhm.
my knowledge of queer politics or trans politics in Indonesia is quite limited, but I found your book super interesting and really fascinating. And perhaps
Mm.
in part because it's about a world that I know very little of, but yet, as someone who was raised Catholic and sort of knows a thing or two about feelings of guilt and how religious world structures your affects, I was like, there are things here which I recognize, even though I don't know the world. Um,
Mhm.
it's super interesting.
Mhm.
So maybe as a sort of a starting point, um,
Yeah.
let's say, how would you introduce this book to people who haven't encountered it yet? What are you exploring here? Stuff from the obvious, from the super obvious. Like
Mm.
what do
Mm.
you
Mm. Yeah, I mean,
what do you play with your Ferdi?
yeah, I think it's important that I describe the book as like an ethnographic book. So it is basically a book that looks at different, I mean, everyday forms of life rather than, I'm not a political scientist, I'm not a sociologist. My work is always focusing on working with people, and this is basically what anthropology is about.
Mm,
And so yeah, it's research based, but my research look at how Muslim, queer, and trans people live in Indonesia, and this intersection between Muslimness and queerness or transness is a particular focal point that I'm looking at because in like popular imagination, the relationship between queerness and transness to Islam is always seen something as irreconcilable, as something that is difficult to, um, yeah, it's incompatible. And so the book actually starts from the very question on how do people sustain meaningful life when social and religious and political conditions around them do not fully accept them or affirm of who they are, basically.
mm.
Um, yeah.
I think there's something interesting there
Mm-hmm.
in you mentioning it being ethnographic, not
Mm-hmm.
because I want to go into detail about ethnography, but in the sense about that writing a book ethnographically means not just showing up and doing a few quick interviews or having a chat with the people. It requires in-depth understanding of how world making happens in this place, how
Mm-hmm.
culture operates, how it requires a much more immersive level of detail than you
Mm-hmm.
get in most kinds of writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, people call it like participant observation, basically. So you don't just participate or just observe, but you also participate in the everyday life, right? The everyday flow of life. Um, but as a kind of like also as a background, actually, because I myself coming from more or less similar background, a Muslim queer myself. I'm from Indonesia. So a lot of the questions that were raised uh, as a the book starting point is actually also for me, biographical questions,
Mm.
because this very question of, I mean, in a simple word, people, whether they're Muslims, whether they're non-Muslims, or they're, Indonesian or not, when mostly at that time, at least, when I started my research around 15 years ago, the question that people ask is like, when they heard that I'm a Muslim and I'm queer, is this kind of stereotypical or stereotyping question, asking like, "Oh, how is that for you? Like, aren't you experiencing some kind of conflict or inner conflict?" And this very question, rather than trying to answer it myself, is basically the question that I go around with when I meet the the protagonists or the interlocutors in my fieldwork, basically. Of course, not in a way, like not as a kind of like a verbal question uh, about this conflict, but actually I I observe or I participate in situation where this conflicting situation came up, and basically how they deal with it. You know.
And that's probably, I'm guessing, part of, if anything, I think that being a participant kind of helps you, and that the people you're talking with get a sense that this for you isn't some sort of abstract question, but it's something
Mm,
that you also have had to wrestle with yourself about
mm-hmm,
these conflicting, relationships between religious values and sort of personal ethics, and
mm-hmm,
how these two fit together in how you live.
mm-hmm. Yeah, because yes and no, because I think one additional dimension that also actually is actually a key, like my main approach, is what I call as affective ethnography.
Hmm.
So it's very much looking at like the emotional life, the feel, like the various types of feelings, atmospheres that emerge in everyday life in the context of Muslim queer and trans world making, which actually allows me, how to say it, like in Indonesia we have this term, when people, oh, you don't have to be close friends, but sometimes when people met and they have, I don't know, some kind of problems, which is more like caused by emotional conflict and so on, they would kind of pour out their hearts out. This is the term, like curahan hati, to pour out one's heart, basically, is 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 a way of interacting, usually in intimate settings. But this is also something that I adopt as a way of talking with the interlocutors in a way that I don't interview it. I don't pre prepare, questions in advance and then go to see them and ask questions, but rather just fully becoming a listener, basically.
Hmm.
And by listener, meaning like to really listen to, and somehow um, there is a need, a dire need in the community, uh, to be able to be heard or to be listened to. And some of the stories, although I maybe to say it flows naturally is a bit simplifying. I would rather say that there's enough closeness between us or rapport between us that makes them comfortable enough to tell basically their life stories, their what they're thinking, what they're dealing with. Um, Using this so-called curahan hati. To an extent, there's sometimes, because I work with different communities, they would tap my shoulder and call me, "Hey, what are you doing? Are you not doing anything? Can we talk? Like let's have a talk." Because our last talk has been very nice, and yeah, so it's becoming almost like, for my part, it's like a service to listen to their stories, but also the tricky part, because also this is part of research, and of course they are all aware about this.
Might there be an aspect, and maybe it's sort of speculating here,
Mm-mm.
where they start to treat you as like that, like nice, slightly older brother that people wish they had that they could talk to that they didn't have in their own families, or like this, you know.
I mean, of course, not everyone. Yeah, I wouldn't. I think out of I met quite a few people in during my fieldwork. I'll explain later in which locations, but and some of them are new location. One of them is actually a new location, and the other two is the new location is in Aceh, uh, which is in the northernmost part of Sumatra in Indonesia, and then in Yogyakarta, where actually this is my chosen hometown, and in Jakarta, which is the city where I'm born, or where I grew up. But still, even of course, especially in Aceh, it's not easy to because the situation there is already very difficult for sexual and gender minorities, because they have their own legal system since a while, since yeah, there's a long history of conflict and natural disaster, the tsunami that changed the whole landscape there, including legal ones, and they implement Sharia law basically since 2000. First being discussed 2005, and I think being installed in 2006, which make it very difficult for sexual and gender minorities, even just to be there basically. So when I came there with my research topic, with my research idea, of course, not a lot of people are welcoming to that. But when they do, um, then the relationship is kind of what translates into the book, basically.
Mm.
But when you said it's whether they treat me as a brother or a sibling, I guess it's more about um, they don't have anyone to really listen to. Like, of course, they have friends and maybe families and even partners, but sometimes actually the problems that they're having is actually with the people who
Mm.
are around them. And with me, I guess because I'm also a stranger in some way, but a weird stranger who goes to all the way, to listen to their stories. For them, it's also something. Yeah, they also take use of it. They make they try to gain as much from the encounter as I do,
I mean, a weird stranger, but what weird stranger who also shows up in the book on people's motorcycles at times, or like late nights discussions like at the salon or
Mhm.
at the coffee shop or other places
Yeah.
that feel more like part of the world.
Yeah, exactly, right? When you go to a bar and you're speaking to a stranger, sometimes you're more open and you're more generous in your stories rather than when you're talking with people around you. Yeah,
Mm,
or you're intimate with.
mm,
So yeah, I wouldn't even frame my relationship with them as friends or or siblings or brothers because that's what I am. I'm there as a researcher, and I think most of them fully realize of my what my role is.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Can we talk a little bit about the title? I think it's quite evocative. I really like the
Mm,
idea about and enduring otherwise. So
mm,
it's not necessarily very heroic sounding, but
mm.
that's not the point. It's almost like finding ways to almost like get on despite great adversity. Or how do you think about it? Like what does it come from for you?
From different places, but like from for the more like conceptual, I was inspired by the works of Povinelli about
Mm,
late liberalism and endurance. Also the work of Abdul Malik Simon, who talks about improvised life and how in the urban global south, endurance has become a way of not only surviving, but on also kind of tapping into unlived or unrealized potentialities, right? Because there's a waiting involved there, but also there's some gain in the process of this enduring or waiting for something to happen.
Mm,
And on the other side, on the other hand, for the otherwise, actually, I'm inspired by the work of Ashan Crawley, who is
mm.
a Black study researcher, scholars, whose work was or is about for that particular term is from his book Black Pentecostal Breath about the breathing as a space of possibility, right? And then he defines otherwise there as something that this multiple possibilities that already exists in our life is just not being tapped into or is not just seen as possibilities as such. Um, and this reminds me all the way go to this whole form of prefigurative politics and how we basically work with what is around us when we're thinking about, change, when we're thinking about transformation. We're not starting from this kind of fixed destination, but rather than working with the relationship that we have, the materialities that is sometimes become resources, but sometimes becomes a challenge, right? Yeah.
So let me see if I understand.
Hmm.
It'd be like saying the important thing here is not here's a nail salon. It's almost like what does this nail salon
Mm.
allow in terms of world making, how it operates
Mm.
as a means of material support or
Mm.
a safe space of refuge or a space of friendship. It's more like what it does for the people there rather than what it is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is a hair salon, just to correct you. A
Oh,
hair
sorry.
run by a trans women in Aceh. Basically, this is what Stephen was telling about in my book, which is run by Maya, one of the main protagonists. And yeah, at the beginning, she made the salon, or basically, she created the salon, hair salon, of course, as a means to survive, right? To have a livelihood. But also, this is not just a decision that came, or I have some money, or I have some investor and I make a hair salon. But this is something, this decision that came after going through life. So, yeah, f like filled with violence, basically. She was a sex worker at some point. She was abused by her family members. She moved different to different cities. She works in different hair salons as well. And when she came back to her hometown, she felt that she wanted to make a hair salon that basically doesn't reproduce all the other violent experience that she experienced before. And so that's why it's from the outside it looks like a normal running hair salon, and the workers there are mainly trans women, because in Indonesia in general, uh, it is difficult for trans people to have like this kind of like stable office job. So the only options uh, that they have, if they have skills, then they would either work or own a hair salon or maybe work in fashion design. But those who have no access at all, then a lot of them working as a street busker, right? Singing for money, from door to door, or sex workers. So these are mainly the four forms of employment that they could access. So having this salon is, yes, a place for livelihood, not just for her, but also for her community. But because Aceh, as I told you, is it's a special location in a way that it's impossible for these women to be in public uh, uh, more than they need to because they're subjected to ridicule, subjected to there's a moral police there who and then also they're kind of trying to blend in with other women wearing hijab, right? But also this also creates another insult of them trying to, play with religion and so on. So what initially started as a hair salon slowly becomes this kind of what you said, this community. I wouldn't say safe space, but this is because exactly by hanging out there on daily basis, it's also made it easier for them to be targeted, like
Mm,
more by moral police, for police officers who maybe doesn't want to arrest them, but like for getting some cigarette money and so on, just to, so they have this place which can interact, but also it's quite fragile, this safety.
mm. I mean, one thing I find interesting is, so for instance, you talk a little bit about, and you talk about this in the book,
Mhm.
how like there was political changes. I think you said starting in 2006 or 2009 that allowed the introduction of Sharia law. But then you
Mm,
also, if I remember correctly from the reading, like these outbursts of, let's say, more like kind of quasi-vigilante community
mhm,
policing don't happen immediately. They happen at different points in time.
mhm,
But I'm not clear like what like what causes that, or is it
mhm.
just
I mean, different, because I think one important turning point was the 1998 reform in Indonesia, where basically after Suharto, the authoritarian regime of Suharto, they basically managed to silence all sides of society, from the right and left, from the Islamists and from human rights movement, from environmentalists to women movement. And when the head is chopped off, right, where Suharto is gone, basically, there's this kind of window of openness, right? Everyone was like, "Oh yeah, let's bring back Marxist leftist knowledge that has been censored for such a long time. Let's bring back conversation around gender and sexuality that is not, following the models that is made by the state." And for the Islamists also, they were for a long time being oppressed. They're being depoliticized basically, uh, which doesn't they didn't have a lot of channels to express their opinions and voices as well. So with this opening, what happened is then you have a lot of groups from left as well as from the human rights, from queer rights, are forming, mobilizing, but at the same time, also people from the conservative side become more active, right? And since then basically you have this kind of continuous frictions in
mm,
public spaces. But I think the one of the I said one of the because there's a new development that I will also share later. The Another turning point was in 2016 when there was a time I remember where a lot of Western countries start to embrace legalize same-sex marriage basically, and this also translate into news circulations, but also opinions, debates in social media. I think one of the when I remember when US legalized same-sex marriage in 2015, there was a filter in Facebook, right? When people can use rainbow filter as their profile pictures. And I think a lot of, because Indonesia have a lot of Facebook users at that time, and a lot of people are using it, and that kind of surprised the conservative. They didn't realize actually how much support there is for, if not allegedly queer themselves, you know, for same-sex, legalizing same-sex basically. And this creates a lot of pushback from
Mm,
the conservative, one being at that time the Minister of Education and Research, who tweeted uh, that he is banning student queer initiative in University of Indonesia in Jakarta. And
mm,
because of this statement, of course, a lot of human rights activists, queer activists, kind of respond back. But actually, the counter response from the conservative is much more massive, and it translates into physical spaces as well. There's kind of like you see in different big cities in Indonesia, like banners, posters with slurs, with anti-LGBT slurs, basically, and campaign. And yeah, it kind of, it's not gone, but it's kind of like, because the impact continues consecutive, like sequent, like how do you say, sporadically, uh, through police raids, also vigilante raids to housings, to saunas, to parties. Uh, and actually, just last month, the heat is cranked up again with the Indonesian Ulama Council. Oh, so sorry, my story is long because this is also a long history. So recently, Indonesia adopt or changed their penal code, right? Initially, before, homosexuality was not criminalized, basically. But since 2022, we have a new penal code. Still, homosexuality is not penalized, but same, sorry, sex outside of marriage is. So meaning, Stephen, if you are not married and you are heterosexual, um, you're still going to be criminalized based on this new penal code, right? But also, and this is like a umbrella clause that women also same-sex sexuality is also criminalized because it's outside of marriage, or same-sex marriage is not legal in Indonesia. So this kind of like this whole logic. Um, yeah, 2022 we have that, and apparently the conservative or the Islamic Council is not happy that there's no actual clause that criminalize LGBT. So, as the Pride season recently again activate the whole social media scene, the Ulama Council come up with a plan to now, or they're working together with the parliament member to come up with a new law basically against LGBT, which uh, too little that we know, they're actually they have a legal basis for that, because our new president, the military general, or the former military general Prabowo, in their national defense scheme, under presidential regulation, define different national threats, and divide it into military and non-military threats. And with non-military threats, for instance, atheism is considered as non-military threats. Online gambling is considered as non-military threats, and LGBTQ culture is also considered as non-military threats. And because of this official document, now more and more like conservative institutions are tapping into that, and then they're really trying to push now to change the whole yeah situation.
I mean, that's kind of evilly clever in that you're yoking together things which could cause actual harm, like addictive gambling, to something which is just not harmful at all. But
Mm,
it sort of reminds me of the way someone like David Graeber, borrowing from Bateson, talks about the idea of schismogenesis, where you define yourself against the other that you're not. So, so this is bad here because this is. It reminds me also of spending time in Singapore and talking to queer friends there, and the way they would talk about how oftentimes conservatives in Singapore would frame queerness as being this sort of like this Western import.
mm, mm.
And then we're like, well, no, actually, the thing that's imported was not queerness, but was actually homophobia. Um,
A- And gender binary.
yeah, yeah.
Because yeah, because of this binary, actually, I think the core of it is actually binary that really try to define something that is in sexual sorry, in Southeast Asia or global South is much more fluid, right? You have
Mm.
different roles and positionality. You don't have, I mean, you can be a woman, a man, a trans woman, trans man, even like other kind of configurations of gender and sexuality that basically are being impoverished by this model of gender binary. And then comes the hierarchy in it, right? So the masculine is kind of the highest in the hierarchy in comparison to the feminine, and where patriarchy comes in, where homophobia comes in, transphobia comes in as well. So yeah,
It does seem in a certain way.
homophobia is a Western import. I agree with you.
It does seem a certain way, what's underlying the kind of anxiety that triggers this kind of shift is almost like fluidity is bad. Stay in a box. Whatever the box is, just stay there. And no, 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 you can't move. You can't be over
Mm,
here as well. No, 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 no.
mm,
Stay in your thing.
mm. Yeah, that's the thing. That's why also I like this concept ambivalence a lot,
Mm.
right? Like because people always the question is always either this or that, right? But how about both this and that, right? People could have much more dimensions than two or even just one, right? And with ambivalence, I guess, is something that because it describes the reality of the relationships and attachments that we have. Like some of our attachment, our desires, uh, can be contradictory, but doesn't mean that we're not, desiring both, right? Um, because people rarely experience things as purely positive or negative ways. Um, they can love their families while feeling hurt by family expectations. They can value religious traditions while questioning certain interpretations. So you have all these sides in in the human experience. And choose? Why do you have to choose between those two, right?
I suppose that's what I was trying to get at in my
Mm,
brief, perhaps not well thought through mention at the beginning about understanding similar issues from being raised Catholic. And
mm,
what I meant there is that like you might say if a religion or social world is condemning of your desires or your reality or your just living,
mm,
just leave. But like just saying just leave kind of glosses over the fact that it creates a world and a series of connections and
mm,
affects that
mm,
that one, it is basically impossible to just magically exit suddenly. And
mm,
two, what if there's things you still value in that world?
mm, mm. I do have one of the protagonists, Anna, actually, she identified herself as a ex-Muslim queer, like a former. So she left Islam
Hmm.
practically. But again, like if you read her story, even after deciding to leave the things that she finds problematic, there are still many other problems that she's dealing with as a human, as from like a spiritual perspective, but also from like relationship perspective. It's almost yeah. That's what I think. That's what makes life possible to to be in these imperfect situations, but at the same time, always imagining different possibilities.
Did you happen to come across any sort of, let's say, like parts of the Muslim community, like institutionally, that
Mm.
were more accepting or welcoming
Yeah,
of queer and trans folks?
yeah. So maybe just to give a context of time, when I started this research, it was what, 2000. I mean, I have this idea of doing, or I apply here and there for my PhD proposal since 2010, I think. So at that time, there wasn't that many. So, but slowly as I start doing my research, more and more initiatives are being organized in Yogyakarta, for instance. You have in Indonesia or in Islamic tradition, you have a so-called pesantren, which is basically a school to learn about Islam, right? But and also this is a very like popular educational practice in whole Indonesia, where people either fully go on through the pesantren system or they combine it with formal education. So they would go to secular school during the day and then study in the pesantren during the evening and also spend the night there. Um, but the thing is, it's very gendered, meaning only male students go to the male pesantren, and then the
Mm,
female students go to the female pesantren. And this doesn't give a lot of space to trans people, right? Because
mm,
so in Jogja, actually, they initiate the pesantren for a for trans women. Um, Inviting also clerics who are quite progressive, I would say, in because there are more and more progressive interpretations of the Quran. Because basically in Islam, the very thing that made homosexuality a big no-no is there's a the story of Lot, right? I think you have it also in Bible. Uh, and with the progressive interpretation is basically they frame the city of Sodom, right? The inhabitant of Sodom was not punished by God because of their committing homosexuality, but because they were basically practicing a lot of uh, inhuman, like slavery, sex without consent, and so on.
mm,
So so this initiative, for instance, and then actually when a few years back, there is a very open trans man, also cleric. His name is Amar Alfikar, who initiated a Quranic reading online for queer people, again with more empowering, more affirmative interpretation of Quran. So yeah, it's becoming more and more, I would say, especially among the younger generation, but not during the time when I did my research, unfortunately.
mm. I mean, I suppose it's not so surprising in that when worlds change, they tend to change either very slowly or all at once.
Mm,
Um, so maybe you only saw little bits of things happening here and there.
yeah, I managed to capture the moment when, yeah, this transitional moment, I guess, because I think what happened with internet and information is, I think, more and more people like you have a lot of this kind of initiative as well globally in South Africa, in US, right? So people catch up with that quite quickly.
Hmm. Um, this is gonna be a strange question, but like, how do the spaces that you're visiting for queer and
Mm,
trans folks relate to other kinds of, let's say, marginal spaces there might be? And talking about like punk kids
Hmm.
or like weird artists, or is there any sort of overlap between these worlds, or are they completely separate?
It's different in different cities. I think the capital of Banda Aceh, there's a lot of kids communities as well. But also they are actually quite very marginalized as well from the moral perspective, or from the Sharia perspective. So there are quite a few, um, I wouldn't say coalition, but like they hang out together sometimes here and then, but not really like uh, at that time also there's not really a more mixed organizing, I would say. Again, this is a different with the current times because there are more and more punk slash queer DIY spaces emerging in Jogja, in Jakarta. But during that time, I think again because it was a transitional time, it felt like each are fighting on their own, like
Hmm.
because they're all, yeah, intersectionality at that time wasn't so much being a thing. So people think still struggle in silos, basically, I would say. Even among the gay men and the trans women, there quite clear separation, and sometimes there are also quite some conflict there due to the gay man doesn't want to be seen around trans women because they don't want to be found out in a way, and the trans woman doesn't like the guts of the gay man because they think they are arrogant and so on and so forth. So this little kind of frictions
Hmm.
happening that to an extent that actually in Aceh I had to do my field work with the gay man in one town and with the trans woman in another town because they're 1 hour away from each other, but still like I make an effort that so then there's no kind of because gossip and rumors. This is also always something about the and trans. I mean, I think in any communities become the bane of like in every interaction, basically.
Hmm. No,
Mm.
I think this is one thing your book does really well is recognizing those moments of gossip, which is an interesting category
Mm.
sociologically, aren't just throwaway, but actually are important key parts of how communities bind themselves, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but also what is interesting, a lot of in this rumoring and gossiping, um, some of them also use it as a space to kind of practice their moral judgment, I would say. So there's a lot of moralizing, so a lot of borrowing from religious teachings and values, and sometimes also othering that is happening within the community. And this is what I'm also I wanted to say this earlier about how a lot of members of the community that I saw or that I met uh, also felt that they they were born as Muslim first, and then they realize that they become queer or they're trans, right? So for them, having kind of like a religious identity is also as important as having sexual and gender identity. Uh, because myself also included, I'm not a practicing Muslim now. I'm a nominal Muslim. I'm a ID based Muslim, a KTP Muslim in Indonesia. But I grew up, with religious teachings from not only from schools but also in daily practice at home from my parents. So this is something that felt, yeah, uh, sometimes it's a bit for others who have the opinion, oh yeah, you can actually live a religion, but actually in the context of Indonesia, I don't think it's possible. I mean, of course you can convert always, but there's so much social sanction that comes with it, if not legal sanction. So being convert or being atheist, as I told you, it was written in the regulation that it's a threat.
Mm. I mean, there's a certain sense in which the convert is always going to be kind of a stranger to, let's say, the most social aspects of the world that you're born into,
Mm,
because you're enjoying it rather than having always been there.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like in Malaysia, even it's illegal to convert. Like so, the law says that every Malay are Muslims. So if they are born in Malay family, then they have to be Muslim with no possibilities of moving to other religion. In Indonesia, it's a less strict than that, but still, there's a lot of risk that come with it.
I mean, we could get into a very interesting discussion about the very weird history of British colonial categories around race and religion. Like, if I
Hmm.
understand correctly, the British Empire used Malay to basically mean any dark-skinned Muslim person. So, for instance, in 17th century British Empire code, a person from Saudi Arabia was Malay,
Mm.
which of course is completely nonsensical because what? How, that's hundreds,
Yeah,
thousands of miles away.
yeah. Yeah, yeah. In Malaysia, it is kind of continuing until now. This kind of racial segregation. Indonesia doesn't have that because although we are a Muslim majority country, especially in eastern part and central to eastern part of Indonesia, we have also Christian majorities, right? But again, doesn't mean that if you're a Christian living in Christian majority region in Indonesia and you are queer, that you would be safe as well because within this minority, there's also quite a strong conservative uh, power working.
Mm. And
Mm.
that conservatism can express itself in similar ways, even though it's not the same religion.
Hmm. I had this audience question. I think he's European. So, so his question after my book presentation was like, "Oh, so what are you saying? So is it the fault of Islam or is it the fault of Indonesian culture that people are homophobic?" Was like, is there any in my presentation that suggests that? No, it's not my point at all. It was like you have homophobia across religion, you have homophobia across cultures, right? And then this person said, well, but what about Bali? Because I was in Bali and they're quite open. It was like, well, you went to tourist area. If you go to Bali, I mean, if you are locals, you'll see that being queer and trans also, they have a difficult life there because also there's a lot of rejection.
It seems to me that, I mean, I don't want to say that you don't have your own political or ethical values here, but it seems to me this book is less about like understanding the root causes of homophobia or transphobia,
Mm,
more it's like here are these people making a world, getting on, doing things
mm,
for themselves, and this is how it works and what it makes for them, and you're sort of
mm,
exploring that and being with that more so than like trying to say, okay, here's why it happened. It's almost like saying
mm,
this is happening. These things do continue regardless
mm,
of what the law says or what the state
mm,
says, these worlds exist.
mm. A friend of mine, or colleague of mine told me, because there's nowhere I refer to Marx there, right, in my book. But she said my book is really Marxist in a way because there's this constant, like I approach my study always, uh, maybe because I don't know if all anthropologists agree, but I found as someone who worked with people on the grassroots, um, and struggling against or struggling within the context of oppression, struggling against state, struggling against oppressive institutions, is that um, it's like a dialectic rather than for like there's no win, there's never any long win. And there's also never any long loser, right? With history, it's like things are like they kind of interrelate. They things when things on the left are becoming more sophisticated, so does the right wing, like so they find new ways also to and this kind of back and forth, this dialectics, I think what defines life. And and of course the fights are important, but if we focus too much on the fights of the winners and the losers, we forgot like the kind of like the long run of things. So how there are casualties, there are people also need to breathe to take care of each other, so that the so-called liberation project is not a messianistic movement, it's not eschatological.
Mm.
It's always there will be always a pushback, and then when the times come, then it's time to like recoup, like to reconsolidate, but also to really again check what we have around us, rather than to just say, oh yeah, we all fail, and then we give which creates a kind of frustration and ennui and paralysis, which are actually also understandable. From what I how I see it, as actually people just need to take some rest, some respite, and then they can continue their fight again for the long run, right?
I think one of the things I find interesting about the way you wrote the book,
Hmm.
this can be difficult to phrase, but when you, for instance, watch like media or read fiction, oftentimes you only have queer and trans characters who exist to be sort of fill in for like they have to deal with the adversity of being repressed, and that's why they're heroic. And but they only exist to be to fill that role. You never get people just they're never just there to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like you're exploring how these worlds maybe operates the wrong world, how the practices of care,
Mm-hmm.
of listening, of
Mm-hmm.
doing things together, how important they are, not because they're taking part in a heroic quest against homophobia and all these horrible things,
Mm-hmm.
but because they're just important because they're world in themselves. They have value in themselves. It's
Mm-hmm.
what they are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I'm trying as much to do is, yeah, because I don't mind heroic stories. I also find some values in stories of victimhood, right? But but the thing is, mm, for me, what is more important is to stay loyal to the stories that are shared
Mm,
by the protagonist, in a way that, um, as I told you, we have all these things together. We can be a careful, oh sorry, how do you say it, like compassionate, if not careful. We can be compassionate, but also at the same time doesn't mean that we can't disagree with each other, right?
mm,
Um, and that's the thing, like if we we anchor all this complexity into certain one value over the other, is that it's hard to, mm, it's too like, yeah, you can't be sterile around this, because this is the texture of everyday life, right? Um, and I'm trying to think of an example of this so-called care work, for instance. I think again the case is Maya. She's been taking her friends, queer or not queer, to the hospital because she has quite some access to the nurses and the system because she worked for a HIV NGO for a while. But because she was seen very often in the hospital, people start to gossip that, oh yeah, Maya have HIV, um, which actually a big stigma still in parts of Indonesia, including Aceh, enough to make people stop going to her hair salon, for instance.
Mm,
Um, so after hearing that story, she literally came through the door like banging the door and well like because there's no one else, she just like start shouting at me, but she's not shouting at me. She's shouting at the person. But basically, she was like, "Oh, do you realize what I've been doing all this time? I'm doing it pro bono, and no one cares. And this is what I got. Like this is like people talking bad about me, right? So what is the purpose in all of this, right? That's what. So even in like yes, people can perform care, but also there's a limit to it. If
mm,
there's no support, there's no recognition that comes with it, um, then it becomes, yeah, it's not only a burnout, but also like, yeah, she questions all of her work thus far, right? What should actually uh, very important I found, but then yeah, also very depleting because there's no one care for her in the meantime. So the care is again a resources that we think is uh, never ending, no, or endless, but actually no, there's a limit to it. And if there's no effort, no conscious effort, intentional effort put into that to care is about to be in a relationship and it requires reciprocality, then what happens is you have all these burnouts and conflicts and frictions, right?
mm. Yeah, it seems important that almost like the lack of recognition of what she's doing there
Mm,
actually is another burden because it's almost like when it's not recognized that it has other
mm,
effects that are quite bad. Yeah, yeah.
mm. And this is not recognition from the other side of the community or those who oppose her. It's actually recognition from within the community. Also, sometimes people take that for granted, right? Because this is what activists supposed to do. This is what our leader has supposed to do. Is like so this kind of create this weird hierarchy again. Yeah.
But it's also tricky because you know I can see it'd be very easy to assume that like if you have a very small community that everyone would know what's going on with everyone else, and then if someone was doing the kind of support work for years that everyone else would already know that. But you know,
Mm.
but yeah, they don't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But this is also just one case in point. I think in general, it is possible to create this. How do you call it? Like, I still not. I'm not sure about using safe space, but there's this space where people could be, right? Um, but at the same time, also, as I told you, it's very fragile because the moment there is politician saying something or something came up in the news, and they'll be the ones who will be first targeted. Um,
Hmm.
you know.
So I forget what you say if it was a friend or not, but how did your friend think your book was Marxist?
No, because of the, I don't know, maybe because because I have made so much focus on the materiality of it, right? Like I maybe she's comparing it to this more I would say humanistic queer scholarship that tends to look at desire and forms of intimacy, while I look at more like materiality and how relationship are kind of mediated by exchange of resources. And yeah, so it's much more, yeah, I don't know, material based, I guess.
Well,
Uh,
it's just funny because if I was going to reach for a comparison, and now I'm probably going to totally offend you, so you could probably yell at me. I'd probably reach less for Marx and reach more for like Mitch Donier.
oh, I'm not familiar with that.
He's an anthropologist that does a lot of ethnographies. Like he wrote a book called Slim's Table, which is about this diner in Chicago. Chicago.
Mm,
The basic summary of his books is: here is a marginalized community. It turns out they're actually building a moral community for themselves, and here's how it
mm,
works.
mm. Yeah, I can say that. Yeah. I mean, you can say that, of course. But everyone has their opinion. I'm not saying my work as a Marxist. This is also just one interpretation. But I guess I'm starting with that story because I do believe this idea of like dialectics in politics and in social life. Yeah.
Cool, cool. Well, we're getting up into around the hour. So I should probably come up with sort of a few things to nudge you
Mm,
towards a conclusion, or nudge myself to a conclusion.
mm,
Um, what would you say for someone, I, thinking about people who read the book, what would you
mm,
ideally like for people to take away from having read your book of like, here's what I learned from reading Ferdi's book.
mm,
It doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be something
mm.
quite small because sometimes those small things are maybe the most important.
Uh, at least for, I mean, there are many kind of targets, right? I think for the community themselves, I guess I think it's important because, and although this is also this is something that I got feedback from someone who read or someone who used the book, parents who has a trans child, uh, who has difficulty in talking about these things, and then they read the book together, and then have a common um, like have a conversation around it. Um, it's about yeah the for me it's about creating space for conversation, basically about how difficult it is actually to build worlds together.
Mm,
Uh, I think it was Graeber who says like when we enter into a collective situation like an assembly, right? Like we felt very moved by it, and we want to actually what's happening next is that we want to it's about trying to recreate the same collectivity again, which actually most of the time doesn't work because then that's where all the care work comes in, the administrational work comes in. Um, so this very idea of collectivity is a means for liberation, but that doesn't mean that um, like you can't just rely on this or objectify collectivity as it is, but it is something that you need to constantly work on. Uh, in an organization, in a group of people, in a group of friends. So just don't take for granted anything that goes into that, right? Including care, including disagreement, including how to listen to each other, how to deal with conflict. But of course, for the bigger audience that doesn't know much about Muslim and queer trans or trans communities or about how they live, how they think, I hope this kind of give them a leeway up to to understand that having a different sexuality and having a different gender also um they are in yeah, we are all human, like uh we have our failures, we have our success, but at the very end, we are as vulnerable as everyone else. Like as speaking of inner conflict, as you said, you don't have to be a Muslim, you don't have to be queer to have this inner conflict. People have that. All people have that, in different ways. So, in a sense, also give so then people could give more grace to others, uh, for their failures and their difference, I guess.
In certain ways, what's more interesting is less that there is an inner conflict and more what people do as they respond to the inner conflict and how they make sense of it and how they relate to it and how
Yeah.
they process
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think even when although it's named as inner conflict, it's never an individual thing actually, because a lot of it involve relationship, involve talking with others, involve solving it with others, but also uh the other way around, like attacking others and rejecting others. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because in a phrase with like I don't know like the inner conflict between us or something where it's about an interiority, but the interiority is always expressed relationally.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's also, I think, what I'm trying to do. Which is not easy because to write about one's interiority, I think a novelist could do that successfully. Also, a novelist can do that, in a kind of like, but because I did this, ethnographic research, I only see like the tip of the icebergs of what these people are thinking or feeling, basically.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Cool, cool. Well, I'll ask you just two more things.
Mm-hmm.
I'll say that I really enjoyed the book, and I hope um, this conversation will lead to more people picking it up
Mm-hmm.
and having a go at reading it. But so the two things that maybe we'll sort of end with tonight. One,
Mm-hmm.
who do you want to play you in the film version?
Oh no.
And
Okay.
secondly, where are you going next in terms of projects or thoughts or
Cool. Um, I don't know. I'm not good with pop cultures. Who? Actors. Um, Definitely not a white actor. No, it's hard because I have very little knowledge of Indonesian actors. Sorry.
okay. I mean, you could also go with like I'd prefer it to be an anime or I want a cartoon version or I'd prefer to be cartoon animals or yeah.
Yeah, actually, I like this film, Persepolis, right? Maybe
Hmm,
something around that version. We cool.
cool.
And what was your second question? Uh,
So we can distract you, but just like what are you doing next? You're working
oh,
on another project or
yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
yet or
So when I did my PhD, I kind of avoid working with activist groups
hmm,
because this is also, by process. I learned that, because of exactly there's a lot of, what I call dirty laundry
hmm,
within activist scenes, that at that time I felt that I don't know how to deal with this, like, ethically, because there's so much dirty laundry within the activist scenes. And then, I'm not a journalist, but still, as a researcher, I need to bear witness to it. And so, rather than going through that lane, so I avoid, engaging with them altogether. Uh, but now, 10 years later, confronted by this reality that actually things not only not get better, but also get even more, I call it more sophisticated. Like, it's more kind of. Uh, yeah, they also the structural violence, the so-called structural violence is also becoming more agile, uh, and more hard to deal with. I felt that actually I need to engage with activists more because I guess what stops them, or what what contributes to the difficult that they're facing now is also because they're not engaging, or they're not dealing with this kind of complexity enough, because activists, they want to be pragmatic, right? They want to have their goals, they want to have their uh, action points and so on, but they also forget about what goes in between that. Who will buy the toilet tissue when the toilet tissue
Mm,
is not there? Who will fix the fridge? Who will provide the food? No one's taking care of that because everyone is too busy being at the forefront, right?
mm,
But actually, as you know, as we all experience right now, when the so-called violent structures has becoming, it's everywhere almost, everywhere you go physically, but from the state, from the institution, from the university, from the corporates, uh, from the right wing activists, from the political parties, even from people you see on the street. Um, we need that space. We need that space for healing and reparation also within us. So my next project is about exactly wanting to look at the role of called radical care environment, also care beyond the humans in relation to queer and trans activism in not only in Indonesia but in Southeast Asia, because I want to engage with Malaysia, we mentioned it already, and maybe several other countries.
mm.
Yeah.
That sounds like it'd be super interesting, and I look forward to hearing more about it. Um,
Yeah, I'm not sure about writing a second book because it took me 12 years to finish the first one. But let's see. Maybe the second one will be faster.
Not all things have to be books, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, ideas can take many forms.
Yeah.
Um, maybe it'll be a laundromat where you can people can do their clothes together, clean their dirty laundry.
Right.
But thank you very much for that. That was super interesting, Ferdy.
Thank you, Stephen. And yes, thank you for making the time. I know you are in a difficult situation now. Hope everything, I hope you can endure it and then also have some otherwise possibilities come up out of
I will find ways to endure otherwise.
it.